Welcome to Nameless Debate Radio, where radioactivity is contagious.
I sort of like there sort of has to be, I guess, a lot of qualifications for that, because I mean, if you say say me and Matt have agreed that logic is the structure of reality, I mean people function more emotionally in a different logical sense. I'm just not I don't have the words right now to fully explain what I'm talking about.
But I think I get what you're pointing at.
I think that because of that, right, that's a major determinant per what people will do. And so I think that as a result, that's probably what you need to impact more once you've established that you're right. But it's also kind of tricky too, because you have to actually establish your yourself as being right if you want to be honest. So it's you have to establish yourself as being right and then go to influencing their emotions afterwards.
Yeah,
thinking about if you actually want to legitimately commit to changing their mind is my point.
For sure, yeah. If you almost can Trojan horse a bit of logic into their emotional system, there's a possibility that they will use that subconsciously in the future. Seed planting, essentially. With logic.
I mean, sort of, but I think that I wouldn't say necessarily. So say somebody is completely wrong and you're right. You may want to just change their mind in a way that doesn't. I'm having trouble explaining I guess the particular process, but essentially to utilize their emotions without implanting that seed to change their mind, or at least change it to some extent, so that then once their mind has been changed, then you can reinforce that with the actual logic.
I think I follow. If we were to put it into a real world analogy with the type of problems that surround addiction, and leading maybe an emotional attachment that one would have towards crack, and then finding a way to sublimate that attachment with something that's less damaging.
Well, yeah, we could use that by saying okay, well, we first get this person to feel good not taking this substance, which is demonstrably harmful for them. What they're trying to do, and then once we do that, we reinforce it with the strong ideas about why we're doing that.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm tracking what you're saying then.
I should be clear. I'm not saying that either approach is necessarily better.
For sure.
I don't know. I wouldn't know to say and I'm not sure anybody knows the statistic about which one is more functional more of the time. But I do think that both can be fairly functional given the right circumstance. It depends on the particular person you're trying to convince and the circumstances surrounding that.
I agree, man. I think there's when I was trying to make a point last night, I think about gauge symmetry that I didn't really make. The thing that I liked about it that Eric Weinstein pointed out was that it uses a custom frame of reference. So it when he used the analogy of sea level to measure Mount Everest, there's no sea around. So it's kind of a smuggled in frame of reference that allows us to see from the bottom to the top, or measure from the bottom to the top. And there's a way of kind of customizing how it is that we would measure where a person is at, and the approach that would best approximate their ability to receive the message that you're trying to convey.
This almost certainly counts as pedantry, but you can't end a sentence with a preposition, Eddie.
Wait, say it again, man.
You can't end a sentence with a preposition, mate.
Okay, tell me Tell me a
You
little
said
bit.
like where they were at.
Ah, okay.
You can say where they are located, for instance.
Thank you. Okay.
But at is a connective word that you can't use at the end of a sentence.
Thank you. Probably do that a lot, actually.
It's funny because no, I get it. Like I actually don't mind like the correction offhand, but it's like I focus a lot on like the ideas, and so like sometimes I'll ignore the like language explaining it, especially
me too.
when I'm tired.
Yeah,
Mostly
dude.
it's just because me and Eddie like have conversations all the time, and like it's sort of like time saving if I can like, give him a correction to a mistake he makes a lot, so that I don't misunderstand him when, for instance, he runs his sentences together.
No,
All the
I get
time.
the right. No, I get the utility of it because like language is the vehicle which you communicate ideas. It's just like it's kind of funny because like like the way that the way that like we actually go about thinking things and how that like changes like our ways of communicating
For sure.
those things that we are thinking about.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
love being
absolutely.
corrected in the midst of a mistake, because
I think though that one was more like sorry to cut you off, Eddie.
Go ahead,
But
man.
I feel like that one was a little more pedantry than what you're talking about. But yeah, definitely, I think that that kind of thing is really, really useful.
Especially as I'm trying to like become a bit better at formalizing the things that I'm saying and doing.
Yeah. Hey, so I actually like have a structure that relates to language, which I'd like to show you guys. The thing is I can't share screen like in this call. Would you guys like to go into like a private call so that I can?
But then we can't record it.
I know you like to fucking record this shit, but like I don't care that much about this.
You couldn't take screenshots?
Or read it.
Yeah, but it's like a chart.
I like.
But the main reason for getting Eddie on is to record our conversations.
Do what you can to like just kind of freestyle with it.
I'll have to reformulate it to a hip hop beat.
Heck yeah.
There you go, man. Some slam poetry.
Well suited.
But let me get back to that gauge symmetry analogy, because I don't understand that process field or idea. But the thing that struck me was adjusting what would essentially be sea level, and the way that we start from the bottom is going to be different for each person, because their perception of the depth of abstraction that they're actually involved in, if they're trying to make some progress in cognitive capacities, there's I guess we could call depth measurement of how far the bottom is. It might not correspond to the actual bottom, but it will be the bottom as it pertains to their perception. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I definitely can understand that. I guess one sort of weird thing, right, is like I do kind of like wonder if like out of fundamental sense, like do you guys like sort of observe ideas as like just floating around without order? Like, and I'm not saying that they do float around without order, right? Like that they don't have an order, but do you think that like were you to visualize like something beyond like where you start, like it would be a place without like order, where like you may have this idea and then that contradicts this other idea, but it doesn't matter?
No.
I think it's a really good question, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because like that is, because that sort of is my experience.
I would say it corresponds to experience.
And I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that that is the case, because like my position on that would be I don't know.
But like perceptually, it seems as though like ideas have this kind of vapor like interaction with our ability to kind of transmit them.
I guess a good way that I would describe it would be like, say you're trying to describe this situation, right?
Okay.
Like you're trying to describe the I don't know.
Okay.
That's what goes on in my mind. And within like those ideas that's like floating around that contradict each other or like don't contradict each other, some of those ideas are like, in fact, sort of the ideas of like the absence of ideas. Or like,
Yeah, I get that.
or like placeholders for things that's like
No,
outside of that I can't think about, but like that like, you know, like could be a third or fourth option.
Yes,
Again, I'm not saying that those exist, or I'm not claiming that they could exist either. So I'm not making the claim that they could exist, and I'm not making the claim that they do exist. I'm just saying, like, when I try to think about that, I don't know. That's like what my mind goes to.
Mm-hmm. I love me some placeholders.
I definitely know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? But from what I can tell, the answer to the initial postulation is no. Like, even if I don't know for sure, it seems like a no. That's as far as I can tell, from my perception.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It's just like when you go like before the like what does it seem like, that's like what it looks like. Is it like,
yeah,
you know,
I understand.
Okay,
I'm saying
and I'm just describing that just to be clear.
No, like I get that.
Okay.
I think what I'm saying though is that what comes before what it seems like is what I'm trying to describe. And when I say it seems, I'm saying like what comes before what it seems like to me, from what I can tell from my like rational analysis, seems like there wouldn't be anything outside of like what's possible logically. Like there's just nothing outside of what's logically possible, even beyond what I can conceive of. That's my opinion.
Yeah, because you don't know about anything outside.
No, not because I don't know about it. Because I've thought about what the things I don't know about would be. Like I've thought a lot about that. What other things? Like what is an object when you know nothing about it? I've thought about that. What is an idea when you know nothing about it? And like what I have concluded is that for an idea to make sense, for it to qualify for the category of idea, it has to be logically possible, or at least look that way when you perceive it. And so the difference between like a logically possible idea and a logically impossible idea is like an evaluation where you say there's a contradiction in the idea, or there's a contradiction. Well, yeah, no, it has to be basically a contradiction between the structure of the idea and the three laws of thought, right? That's what's logically impossible.
Can I pause you right there?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, let's say the three laws of thought are the pen that probe whether or not it's a balloon that's going to pop, or it's the pen is just going to, let's say, not. Like, the idea will be. Like,
I'm
if
not
it's
sure
logical,
that metaphor is good enough.
Yeah, it might not. It's grasping, actually.
It's more like if something's logically valid, then when you put liquid in it, none of it leaks.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay. And then if the same is true of a logically invalid, or I'm sorry, something that's illogical.
The opposite is true.
The opposite. Then
So like you put water in it and it leaks, and those leakages are the illogical bits.
Nice. Yeah, that really makes sense, actually.
And so like when you have like a thought or an idea which is illogical, that means that it exists as an object of your imagination, but could never exist outside your imagination because it's literally impossible.
So this is what I would say, right? Part of it is like I think that I'm tired, and so I can't find the proper words to describe myself as sufficiently as I would like. But I'm not like 100% like confident of anything. And I think that part of that includes like not even being confident about like what you're describing, like not to the fullest extent, although I am of course like very confident about it.
I don't think anybody here is confident to the fullest extent, where for the fullest extent would have to be certainty. But we're
Mhm.
confident. I know I personally am as confident as I can think it is, as far as I can conceive of. I'm as confident as a person can be in their analysis.
Yeah, and I feel as though what I've done in terms of checking whether or not that's what we could call a worthy or a warranted confidence is by basically interacting with Matt for what is this, the past 2 years, man?
Yeah, but what I would ask is like, so is there a point, right, where you would say that you are so confident that it is irrational?
No.
Yeah, I've never seen it be irrational.
Okay.
I am exactly as confident as I am allowed to be.
Based on the like the value that should be placed on the claim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like, Matt, let's try and metaphorize it a bit in terms of, like, for me, how I would put it from my own point of view is that I have a pixel of certainty that I'm absolutely confident about. And then I use every bit of my ontological prowess to make that point clear and understood in others. And the signals that I get back from them when it's understood from a point of view that they have something similar but different, I like extract a little bit of, I think it's working. This seems true. That's cool. Like I just give myself little pats on the back every time something seems data logically,
Oriented.
significant or something like that, or oriented. Thank you, aligned in some way. And the amount of things that I'm willing to go on and claim as data logical are so few. There aren't very many things in my life that I'm data logically certain about. But the fact of it as a necessary or kind of that immovable object.
Yes, for sure. Yep.
That doesn't have a counter. There's no unstoppable force to meet it. The unstoppable force is imagination, essentially.
Yes.
And when it
I fully agree with that.
comes into contact with that immovable object, nothing happens. It's just
Well, we get some nonsense, really.
we get some nonsense, and sometimes you can extract beauty or art or something aesthetically pleasing or something emotionally stabilizing. I mean, there's a great number of things that we get out of fiction. And
well, fiction isn't quite nonsense, though, right? It's like different sense.
Yeah, like the fiction. I don't know why I smuggled that in right there.
Like, well, that's because fiction is two things. It's something which isn't true, and it's something which is an alternative truth,
nice,
right? Like,
yeah.
but what we were talking about originally was not truth, and then the problem that I identified was that, like, fiction can be true in a way that isn't literal truth, but is nonetheless not true, because it is in some way. It is obviously in some way true.
It's weird because like, so I definitely want to talk about this, but like when I'm less tired, because I think that I could be way more productive insofar as like describing my ideas more sufficiently.
I was gonna just quickly say.
I just want to, just before you finish, or say, I want to just mention, because I totally follow like what you guys have said. It's just like it really comes off without being able to describe it well. Like there is like a piece of the puzzle that like we're missing in a sense, and I think that like I think that like I may like to talk about that.
What? Okay. Well, like we'll have to wait till later, I guess, to get your opinion on what that is.
Yeah.
But like with regards, sorry.
Oh well, okay. So because I was gonna say something next that's like way less relevant. Could you finish your current point, please?
I was just going to say, like, to follow on from what Eddie said about confidence, the way that I personally would describe my confidence is something like, I'm not certain about anything, but there are some things which I consider to be irrefutable. And then, like, the further you reduce those irrefutable things, you get to more fundamentally irrefutable things. And I think that there are, like, a couple of things about the world which I find to be fundamentally irrefutable in a way that seems to correlate with other people's experiences when we discuss the topic. Because when I ask them, like, what, apart from these two things, data and logic, what could things be made of? Like, can you think of anything else that even if it was different to this, it wouldn't fundamentally still be this? And the answer is always no. And so it's like, even if I'm not certain, like, the fact that I find it to be so irrefutable in every single analysis I've ever like put it in, and there's been a lot, is like, it lies in confidence that looks a lot like certainty.
Yeah. So I want to actually add to that point, because there sort of is okay. So I just want to say overall, if there is like a puzzle piece that we're missing, I don't necessarily disagree with like what you're saying. But I want to point out, to like add to the point you were making, I think that like the reason you are that way, right, could be because in a sense you may be forced, right? Because it's like, this is a point that I've made it to like a lot of presuppositional apologists, and I've not made it here really, but like the reason why like I don't accept a lot of their arguments is because like in one of the most fundamental senses, right, I'm like literally forced to like think differently than they are suggesting.
Of course, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so
but
it's
I think,
like, when they tell me that, right, it's so like if the conversation is about like we're talking about like reason or logic, which is like from, well, reason is from logic, if we're talking about that, then we're essentially put in a position where like we're not focusing on the fundamental thing that like puts us on this path that's like different than what they're suggesting we should be on. And so I do think that like the more like it's so fucked, because it's like I haven't talked to like presuppositionalists this much in like quite a while. The last time I really got invested in this was like people, it was with people like not Saiten Bertanen himself, but like essentially like people that subscribe to like a lot of his ideas, which by the way, I should mention, like Darth Dawkins is like totally, he's totally like a ripoff of Saiten Bertanen. And anyhow, basically, like I'm just thinking that like talking about force may be like one of the best approaches to deal with presuppositional apologetics.
Talking
Because
about what, sorry?
Force.
But
Yeah.
do you mean determinism there?
Because
that's what it sounds like you mean.
No, I wouldn't say. I would not say determinism.
What do you mean then?
Because determinism entails like a process, right?
No, it entails like reduction to mechanics. As in, like, your mechanics force you to be the way you are.
That's a little different than, well, so yeah, I
mean, that's like deductively true, right?
Sure. I mean, like I can accept that like determinism leads to that. I'm just not sure I would say determinism is that.
Oh, I'm saying like anything that is like an inherent implication of determinism is still part of a deterministic like proposition, because you're saying this is true, and by extension you are saying everything this implies necessarily is also true.
Yeah, I guess I just wouldn't describe it as determinism. I would be more specific and say, like, in this instance, I am forced, like, without even
Yeah,
talking
but I
about
mean,
anything else. Like, I get that
I
you would go,
I
you
think
would
what
like, I get you would graduate to like saying, like, talking about other things. But my
Oh no,
point
I'm just
is
saying like
just
the
when dealing with this, you would
like the
like say that
tag.
you are forced in this instance.
No, but the point is that the categorization of that like defense is that it's an appeal to determinism. Because when you say you're forced in this instance, you are saying you're always forced, and in this instance, this like an instance is part of the whole that is like what you would consider always. So like insofar as like your like actions are forced upon you by the mechanics by which you act, you're always forced. And I'm, as far as I can tell, when you're saying like you're forced now, it's just to get around the obstacle, which would be the presuppositionalist going, well, I presuppositionally reject determinism, right?
Mm-hmm. It's like presuming as though the machinery that's allowing us to make these calls and record them.
You don't want to make to them the claim that you know that they are like dogmatically opposed to. You want to make a smaller claim that is the same, but that they might not reject.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it is sort of like specifying like a specific rephrasing of like a particular overarching view to like get them to like accept a certain idea, at least about how you function.
It's an interesting tactic. Like I think ultimately, though, it does come down to like something I fundamentally agree with. And I guess the reason that I might run into, for instance, a problem with presubs, if I'm being honest with them, is that like if they ask me if I think that we're both forced to think a certain way, obviously my answer is going to be yes. But their reasons for thinking that way are based on the specifically limited analysis of presuppositionalism, which is like your arguments are informed by your presuppositions, and I'm making a claim that is functionally equivalent in the scope they're using, which is actually a larger claim that they would contest, right? Which is that determinism is true, and as a consequence of that, their claim about us both having to think about it a certain way must be, by extension, true.
Can I make sort of an anecdotal claim and say like not this as in like this is like representative of all like presuppositional apologetics. I'm sorry, apologists. But that like my anecdotal experience of presuppositional apologists is that they tend to be very dishonest. Like not everyone, of course, I've met, but like a lot of them that I've met.
I guess I have a hard time seeing it because when I feel like someone's being dishonest, I always think about the fact that when I'm being dishonest, it sort of feels like honesty, And it's this weird one. It's like sometimes when you're being dishonest, what you're doing is you're being honest, like about who you are without being like open about that honesty, if you know what I mean. And it's something like that, right? Like when people are dishonest, when they argue. So let's take Darth Dawkins, right? He argues in a dishonest way. So does Batman. But the thing is that from what I can tell, the only way someone who considers themselves to be a respectable person would allow such conduct from themselves is if they thought that that was the appropriate way to behave. So when they're arguing in this dishonest way that you and I find so objectionable, the only conclusion I can come to is that someone has taught them that that's the way to go about it, that sophistry is a good tactic, that nobody really cares about the truth, and so that's what they think. And it's not because they're being dishonest on purpose, it's because they think everybody is dishonest and they're just trying to be honest to the reality.
Yeah, it's as though they've been primed to expect anything outside of the bubble that is going to reject the word of God
exactly.
as the
they're being dishonest to be honest to like what they view as reality. But
they're saying like they think they're being honest with regards to how people always act. And so if you're doing something dishonest, but everybody does it, in some way it's honest. You're just not admitting to it in an honest way. The fact that you're doing it is honest.
So they conceal that part of themselves. His
Yeah,
kind
but
of,
because he doesn't know how to justify the tactics he uses, it's
Right.
sort of like he doesn't know how to like react when people challenge him on it. That's probably why he mutes so many people, right? Like he's not quite sure why he's right. He just feels like he is. Right? Like people challenge him on the tactics he uses all the time, and he sort of just like dismisses them and mutes them, and that's because like he thinks that's what everybody's doing. And so when you tell him you're not allowed to do that, he says, you are a bigger liar than me because you're not even being honest about what I think the rules are. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like he's like, these are the rules. Everybody's using them. Everybody is quote unquote cheating. So if those are the rules of the game, they're not really cheating. And when you tell me that I am not playing by the rules, you are trying to cheat in a way that other people and me deem inappropriate because I'm clever enough to know the rules, and the rules are everybody is cheating, and trying to get me to play by the rules is your particular brand of cheating.
And
It's something like that.
Honesty destabilizes that entire
Of course, and
presupposition.
so that's exactly why you label it the way he does, right? Which is that, well, you aren't being genuine, you're just a troll. That's basically his main response. When you're not agreeing with him, but you're not, saying things that don't make sense, because he's quite good rhetorically, and he's like not unintelligent. He's paying attention to what you're saying, and he's sort of like pinpointing the bits of it that aren't correct. You know what I mean? So if you say things that aren't correct, he's sort of stalling with his rhetoric until you do, and then he makes a bit of a fool of you, and then he talks down to you, and then he rinses and repeats. It's a script of his, and so like.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have those mistakes in your thinking and you're talking to him, he gets frustrated quickly for reasons that aren't clear, like as in like it's not clear to everybody. But if you're interacting with him, it's kind of clear that what's actually going on is that he's getting frustrated that you don't agree with him, even though you're making some sense. It's something like that.
But you
like
can
it's
hold
like
your ground.
yeah, it's the
accurately.
idea that you're a reasonable person, but that you don't agree with him, which destabilizes his entire identity, man.
Yeah.
So like that's
Well, it's
as
a bit
far as I
like-
can tell. That's why he like can't like stomach interacting with me properly. Like he basically ends the conversation after 20 to 30 minutes every time, usually by muting me. And it comes down to the fact that like when I answer his questions, like either he can't understand what I've said, or he like or it's basically just that he can't understand what I've said, or he follows it rhetorically to a point where he can't understand what I've said and then tells me I've said bullshit, basically. Right? So like he'll ask me like genuine questions like what are some of the conditions of the necessary like or absolute being, right? And then like I give him like some of the conditions. It's in one of the recordings I've uploaded. I give him some and he goes, well, like that's so like one of them, first I said it was Datalogic. I didn't quite understand the question. I think he asked me what it was. Yeah, he asked me what is the foundation for my belief, and I just told him straight up, and he like rejected it a few times. And then like he asked me the characteristics of it, and I said it is like non-contingent, which means that it's like necessary, it's necessarily existent. And his response was something like so it exists, so what? And I said like no, not it exists, like it must exist. And the nuance completely went over his head. He didn't even listen to it. He kept ranting, having not even listened to the thing that I said, which completely cleared it up. It's like, you've completely misunderstood. You know what I mean? You think I'm saying it exists, and obviously no shit. Like calling that sort of like an obvious point is fair enough, but that isn't what I've said. And if you just listened for a second, maybe you'd figure that out. But because to listen would suggest that he might think he's wrong, and presuppositionalists fundamentally refuse to accept that that's even possible, it's almost impossible to communicate with him at this stage because he's in one of those ideological, what would you say?
Possessions or entrancements.
Yes, yeah, something like that. Like the rigidity defends itself at this stage.
Yeah.
The way that he has entrenched it defends itself. And it's like a mental illness in someone who kind of likes that they're crazy. Like that. It's like you can try to help them, but on some level, the bit that's going wrong is like being enabled by the bit that's not, and good luck fixing that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about when you mentioned earlier. Like, there's an appeal to, like, it's kind of like a truncated space within oneself. that denies that it's deceiving itself. And maybe that's the space where someone listens from. And so they can just bundle the listener up into a space of denial and
That's
say,
very interesting.
you stay in that room, don't you come out, I have an argument to make. And I always get messed up when you come out of the room.
It's not exactly that. It's more like the listener is, what would you say? They're put to work, but they have their capacity limited in a specific way, which is like, what can I use? So the listener is paying attention to the other person's words insofar as they want to argue with them. That happens a lot. People do that all the time. But it's not that the listener's in a room and not there. It's like the listener, it's sort of like it's sort of like the listener's been drugged. The listener's been drugged, and the drugs make them compliant, but they also make them fuzzy. And so the listener is being drugged by, I guess, maybe the ego. And the ego is saying, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen insofar as they agree with me and not listen any further because it is a waste of time because what I think is right. And to think otherwise is false. And so to like attempt to waste my memory, like sort of trying to figure out what they've said and how it's wrong is stupid. It's something like that, you know. It starts with the assumption that you're necessarily correct, and then it reasons carefully to it being inefficient to engage with that which is not what you think. Or that which cannot be, or that which seems opposed to what you think, to be clear. Because Darth Dawkins does engage with what he doesn't think, but he only likes to engage with it when he thinks that it looks like he can transform what they think into what he thinks easily.
Yeah, opportunistically.
Exactly, right? And otherwise he sort of like implies you're a bit stupid for not following.
Yep. Dude, that sounds pretty spot on, actually.
Well, I've had a few interactions with him at this stage.
And I don't know this guy in particular, but what you were describing was, to me, the process of mounting one's high hopes.
Oh, he's the presuppositionalist in the videos who has polished rhetoric.
Okay. Well,
it's like, you know Mr. Batman?
Yeah, that guy.
Yes, that script, but better. Much better. Like,
nice.
How is it that you know things if not for the ultimate authority of God? Like, I could probably give you an example. I could maybe try and give me a sec. I'll try and compose my like impression of him.
Yeah, do an impression.
Wait a second. So I just want to mention. Also, I should say I just got back. I want to mention that like what you're describing is a result of him thinking that there is no way he could be wrong.
Yeah, for sure. I actually already said that a little earlier on.
You did.
I did.
You didn't say it. I don't think you said it in like the context of what you said afterwards. Like,
that's fair enough. I thought that it followed.
Like, there was a big time difference to where like I didn't think those points connected properly.
I mean, look, they connect in my mind, but I understand what you're saying. Maybe they appeared unconnected.
In the language.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, because like linguistically, if they were written down, it would be connected. It's just that like the RAM of your mind means that you can't hold them all properly together. And so like if I said it sufficiently long ago, then they won't connect it, even if it is connected conceptually.
So my understanding, right, was that like you said that a while ago, and then we started like talking about other things in sort of like an intermission, and then then we started talking about the point that would follow. But it's like if that was written down with that intermission, like that would distract insofar as the appearance goes of what
I'm not so sure I agree, to be honest, because like most of the time, I'm pretty much all the time, unless I'm sort of like postulating something I'm not sure about, which happens sometimes, especially with close friends who I think are quite smart. But most of the time when I'm like making an argument about what I think is true, what I'm saying is that the thing that I'm saying is not only true in isolation, but it's also true in terms of like it's consistent with everything else that I think or have ever said to you that I think is true and still hold today. So like I don't differentiate properly between them, because I think that when you say a proposition is true, you inherently imply that it is consistent with everything else you've said. So if I said that it was true in the past and like not too long after, I'm talking about something else that I think is true, right? Like the like progression I would say is contextual enough, given the rule that anything that I say is true is something that I think is true in in the context of everything else I have said is true.
I mean, okay. I think that like if you take into account like all of the context for sure, specifically with say like with what your intent is, etc.
Oh no, but I just mean like the context of like the discussion, right? Because it wasn't like it was disconnected in a different dialogue.
Oh, no, but it was like, well, okay, so it was sort of like you had different parts of a dialogue, and then like you had another dialogue sort of started like right in the middle of those parts.
I think that they're connected.
As far as the appearance goes.
The dialogues are like inherently connected, in my opinion.
No. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I'm saying that like if you were to write them down, the appearance of what's written would seem to suggest that like it isn't in such a way that's like the best possible like way of communicating it. Like you would connect them without that intermission. I understand.
Oh, okay, I think I know what you're saying.
I understand in your mind. Yeah, I understand in your mind.
I think like what I was saying though was just that like the reason that I didn't clarify it, not that the clarification was inappropriate, but the reason that I didn't clarify it is because I had already said it just recently. So I'm holding that is my like I think it's implicit knowledge.
No.
Like,
I understand. Yeah. I totally get your function. That's fine.
So what was I saying? I was talking about.
We're gonna do parody.
That's right. All right. Okay, Eddie.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Oh, fuck. So it's like before we. Okay, I just want to point out like one thing. Well, actually, I want to talk about something else if that's okay. Like quickly, sort of quickly.
Yeah, sure.
But before I talk about that, I just want to say like I like how like Dawkins himself, and I don't mean this in like I don't mean this in like a malicious way, but it's just funny to me how like his existence and like others similar are like completely irrelevant. Like like in terms of
That's
like
brutal, man. How could you not mean that in a way that is brutal?
Let me hold on. Like in the sense that like they're completely irrelevant in the sense of like who they are as people, and it's more like we're just like focusing on like the concept of people that like behave in that particular way.
Yeah.
And it's just like it's just sort of like in a way funny that we're kind of dismissing the humanity even though it's like totally appropriate.
So Eddie.
Yeah, go for it.
How is it that you know that things are true?
Am I being me or am I?
You're being you. I'm Darth Dawkins, but just just call me Matt.
Okay, let me try. How is it that I know that things are true?
Yep.
I think the way that I could start answering that would have to be from an internal place of reflection to come to a space of analysis of some type.
So like if I was Dawkins, I would have jumped in halfway through probably and told you that you're not answering my question. I think what I was asking was more like how is it that you verify something is true?
How do I verify that something is true?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is something I've been questioning. My own personal process goes into.
Mm-hmm. So are you the ultimate authority?
Well, in terms of my perspective, it would seem.
No, but about what's true.
About what's true, I would have to say I think such a thing is possible.
Well, I'm not really sure that you answered my question. I asked, are you or are you not the ultimate authority?
Only for myself, yes.
But that's not an ultimate authority, so you didn't answer my question again. Are you or are you not the ultimate authority?
Is there such a thing?
That's not the question I'm asking you. I'm going to have to redirect you again to the question I asked you. Are you or are you not an ultimate authority?
I'm guessing it depends on what you mean by authority.
Authority is like the cause for something being true.
Cause for something being true.
Like how something is authorized, more precisely. So like, on what grounds is something true? The authority that you assign the claim is based on the grounds of the authority. And I'm asking you, what is your ultimate authority in terms of the grounds of you claiming that something is true?
My ultimate authority that serves as a ground for
For you to claim something is true, yep.
For how I claim that something is true.
Correct.
Is generally based on my experience.
Okay, so when you say your experience, that is like you identifying in your environment like differences and similarities between the phenomena, am I correct?
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. So how do you like check if something is different or similar? How do you know that there are such things as differences and similarities?
By observations I've accumulated over.
That's not really what I asked. What I mean is like so like how do you know one thing from another? Like why is one thing different from another thing?
My response to that is based on the information of the things.
No, but like in general.
Okay. So how do I know one thing from another? By, I guess, the words that are used to describe the things.
That's not really what I'm asking, though. I'm asking, like, what principles do you apply in order to know one thing from another?
For me, it would be...
Man, somehow I make I'm a, like, significantly more polite version of Darth Vader.
I know, I was going to say you're being way too
crazy.
But for me, let's say I think I'm imagining, and after I imagine, I try to install...
No, but like... I feel like that's a bit off topic, though.
Oh my god, like, okay, I know I'm pretty tired, but I can definitely satisfy the, like, loud yelling part. So, okay, let me tell you that, like, you are...
Let me teach you a thing.
Maybe teach.
Maybe learn.
Let me learn you something.
Let me fucking school you that you need to understand this particular thing I'm saying, or you can just shut the fuck up.
The God of the Bible is true.
Okay.
You are an insignificant little nothing. And if you don't accept what I'm suggesting right now, I will never fucking speak to you again. Because you don't have cognitive ability to understand what I'm saying, and you're being dishonest about that.
That's the ticket.
That sounds pretty good and brutal. I would like to be of the student role as you show me the way. Let me ask you if this is the way that you think is the most teachable, meek, humble way that Christ would appreciate seeing. Like, is this something that the type of behavior that Christ would condone?
I think it really depends on like what your view of like how authoritative Christ was. You know, like God is the one who wrote in the Bible, and Christ said that many things that were written in the Bible were not like accurately interpreted. So maybe our interpretation is the thing that's flawed, and the word of the Bible would be inerrant.
Well, I have a hard time. Like, if we were to look at every word,
that was a bit too coherent. Maybe I should try again.
But every word in the Bible, like, we could look in Job and we can find the words "curse God and die." So how does that fit into infallibility? Like, if we were to curse God and die right now.
So like, how do you know what the word curse means?
Through looking it up.
Yeah, so like it has an identity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in order to know what the word curse means, you presuppose the law of identity, don't you?
seems as though I do.
Yeah, so where do you get the law of identity from?
Would seem the subjective architecture of thinking itself.
No, because the law of identity is something that like governs the natural world, and it like is presupposed before your subjective architecture can ever come to any conclusions. That's the whole point. Is the way that you differentiate between phenomena, the way that you say that one object is distinct from another, is because they each have identities, and you presuppose the law of identity in that analysis to come to the conclusion of the law of identity. So my question to you was simple. It was, where does that law of identity come from?
I think the idea of coming from presupposes something as well.
Do you deny that we have observed empirically that the Big Bang occurred?
I do not deny that such a metric exists in the bound volumes of empiricism that science has accumulated.
Yeah,
And
so
what we-
presumably you would say that like the Big Bang represents like the beginning of our universe.
I would say the Big Bang represents a way that humans can think about the beginning of the universe.
But is that not a beginning then?
I would say it's like the beginning of a story, like a narrative. But
Okay, so
to
like wow. I'm confused though. You're saying like in the way that it's the beginning of a story or a narrative, you're saying that the end of the story is not the existential end. It is the termination of the telling. Is that correct?
The recipient of the message that would be told, it would be the end of that thing.
The end of the recipient.
Yeah.
Would it though? I mean, I think. Well, could you maybe rephrase how? Because maybe I follow you, but maybe I don't.
Well, it seems as though if we presume the beginning of this universe,
Mhm.
that there's a presumed end as well.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm not sure, but we'll go with that.
Basically, because I think if we were to presume it infinite, there's no real way to prove such a thing logically.
Mm-hmm. That's. I mean, like, you could suggest. You could make a compelling argument, perhaps. I'm not sure. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm not too sure what this has to do with our argument about the Christian God.
Well, if we presume that you know what you mean when you are saying that word, and
Yep.
that I know what I mean when I'm saying that word.
Yep.
And then however it is that we connect the areas of overlap where we have an agreement on what that word means or represents,
Mhm.
it's possible that you and I are talking about the same thing. But let me use an analogy. In the case of water, on Earth we have the symbols of
But if we're
H2O.
talking about the same thing, then the law of identity is unviolated. Isn't that correct?
That's why I think I have to point out, like, and I'm not sure if this relates to that, but let me say this, and you tell me what it sounds like then.
I mean, if I was Darth Dawkins, I wouldn't let you, but continue.
Yeah, I know, right? If there was another planet that had a different chemical makeup of water, and instead of H2O, it was, H5O or something like that. And imagine that it's somehow chemically structured so that it's stable and can be all the same properties and words that we use to describe water on Earth are used to describe water on that planet. So I want to drink water is wet, so on and so forth. But when we are referring to the actual chemical structure of all of those words, the actual chemical structure is different. So,
but isn't that one of the meanings?
Well, what I'm trying to say is that chemical structure representing God, if it's different in my mind as opposed to yours, but we're using the same word to identify different structures, it's very possible that we're just completely talking past each other, and I'd prefer not to do that.
Very, very possible. But like, I was merely asking about your presuppositions, right? So like, do you presuppose the law of identity?
I'm not resolved on what I think about the law of identity.
I mean, like, I'm asking, like, when you reason, do you presuppose it to be true for the purposes of your reasoning, let's say?
I believe I presuppose that there are things that could be called identity.
I think, like, so do you not use, like, the rule when you read? Do you not use the laws of thought? I would imagine that you do.
I believe I do, but I don't know if I'm doing it consciously.
Okay, but that's a presupposition. Presuppositions aren't conscious.
Okay, fair enough.
Yep. So a presupposition is something that you take to be true for the purposes of reasoning, without necessarily like having thought about the fact that you're doing that.
Okay, so the law of identity basically
You
being
come
then,
to it before even having reasoned. It's something you presuppose to be true, and then you start to reason after that, and it's not something you consider in your reasoning generally, if it is a presupposition.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, so
Huh.
like, yeah, you presuppose the law of identity from what I can tell from talking to you. You sound pretty reasonable, and that means that you would in fact presuppose the law of identity. Do you say that's true?
I'll accept that.
Okay, so where did the law of identity come from, sir?
It seems as though it would come from the structure of nature itself.
Okay, but like, isn't the structure of nature itself natural revelation of the Christian God?
I believe that's one method that humans have used to interpret the structure of nature.
That's not really what I asked you. Is that a no?
I would say it's not an invalid path, but it's not the only one.
I mean, like, every other path is presupposed by the intelligibility of nature, which is permitted only by the principles of logic that you get from the Christian God. No other worldview codifies the laws of thought as in like the laws that govern nature, the laws that govern the events in the Bible. They govern everything, and if you look at the Bible with those laws in mind, you can see that the Bible never contradicts itself, whereas other faiths have texts that do contradict themselves. They contradict themselves and they contradict the Bible, and if you have a contradiction in you, then you cannot be true. Isn't that so?
I do believe that we should be with as few contradictions as possible.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, what's the functional difference between my statement and your own?
I would say that the way that we derive our analysis of what a contradiction is or is not is different.
How so?
The way that one who interfaces with revelation seems to me to be a person that values the narrative devices of...
No, not at all. Not at all. I think that the Word of God justifies the intelligibility of creation. That is a rational argument, sir.
The Word of God justifies the intelligibility of, what was it?
Creation.
Creation. So creation is made intelligible by virtue of something
Creation is intelligible by virtue of it being an extension of God's mind. That's where intelligibility comes from, sir. The rational laws that we appeal to in our reasoning, which we do not always implement correctly, but which we know about, are the laws of the world. And the reason they are the laws of the world is because the God of the Bible said so.
So is the said so part of it, is that
That's in the
essentially
Bible.
Well, is it like if we use a metaphor, is it like a wireless connection?
I'm not sure that that's a good metaphor for what we're talking about. We're talking about like God's word is the truth, right? The truth of the truth of the environment that we can observe is literally God has spoken that truth forward, and that is what we observe, is the spoken truth. We just don't recognize it for what it is, which is the word of God. And in the Bible, it identifies natural revelation, the experiences of our environment and everything magnificent in it, as exactly that, the word of God. Now, interpretation of it as anything else is only permissible through the fact that the word of God has allowed it to be that way.
So is the word of God a symbolic utterance to say that the world is made of language?
The world is the symbol and the thing it is referred to.
So I think that's where I would have to disagree, because...
How so? How would you know?
Well, I don't know that knowledge would be a necessary precondition.
But how do you know anything?
It seems to me as we're both in deep in abstraction.
Nope, I happen to know for sure because I start with the word of God, which is the Bible. And in the Bible, it says that the word of God must be true. Right? And so like the word of the God of the Bible says that all of creation is intelligible by his words, and that is what we're attempting to mimic when we're talking.
So the language of God, then, is it a particular dialect, or?
Yeah, it's the dialect you can see all around you. It's the dialect of being.
And then we add like English on top of the dialect of being?
Yeah, for sure, yep.
Okay. Let me see if I understand you then.
It's translated into English. That's what science and religion have always been, the translation of the truth into like linguistic and verbal truth.
So then would like the language of being be the first way that Hebrew attempted to, or Aramaic, or
I'm
the
not
Middle
sure
Eastern
about the question.
languages?
What are you asking?
I'm asking like the biblical writers in the Middle East back in the Bronze Age, when they were, I guess, conforming their language to the language of being, or the dialect of being.
Yes.
Is that then the first like version, like 1.1 of trying to get the word of God from eternity into?
So here's a difficult one, right? Because I actually do think this next bit, it's not part of the shtick.
Okay.
So the people who wrote the ancient religious texts that we know of today, I don't think they were as misguided as they seem. I think what's true is that they had the same intuitive understanding that we have managed to articulate today, and that when they said there was God, they meant that there was an ultimate and transcendent reason for there to be things, right? And that the language available to them did not sufficiently capture the variety that they wanted, the nuance that they wanted. So they used what they had. And they said, this is God, right? So what I would say is that the ancient, to take on my Darth Dawkins guys again, the ancient like languages of humans were not very sophisticated, and that's why the message of God needed to be updated, because once the languages had evolved sufficiently to support a more articulated understanding of God's law, he decreed that they should come to understand it through another prophet.
Okay. I mean, it's funny because there's like, in terms, let's like sidebar.
But that's not true for Islam, just this what Darth Dawkins thinks.
Yeah,
Islam
like
is
this
a fake religion.
Oh, yeah. Well, he can't have room for any other religions.
What's interesting though, he actually I've heard him he's got a couple of pieces of rhetoric that are pretty damning. He says he just points out that if the Christian God and the Muslim God were the same God as most people think, then there wouldn't be in the message of the Quran, there wouldn't be actual proper contradictions with the fundamental message of the Bible. And he demonstrates that there are some, and that he demonstrates that they are. He makes it look like the mistakes are misinterpretations of the Bible's true message in his little rhetorical spiel. It's interesting.
That is kind of, I think of whichever religions came first as the ones that came after were informed by the failures or the new kind of cultural adaptations that would apply to their geographic locations.
Absolutely. And I think
So
when it comes to truth, Christianity actually has a stronger than average claim.
I see what you mean. I hate the way theists wield the plausibility of that claim.
Well, I just mostly mean that they say that their God is truth, and because of that, they have, for a long time now, advanced the ideas that would be their undoing, because they believe that their God is truth, and to do such would be to realize in their brains the structure that God put forth. You know, and it's specifically in Christianity that is encouraged, whereas Islamic science has been stagnating for 1,000 years. So
yeah, and they generally confuse the language for the light. The word God is pointing at something that we could very easily just call the ineffable, especially from.
Yeah, well, that's what my quite intelligent Muslim friend Vivi calls basically, I can't remember exactly how he likes to refer to it. It's a bit clumsy though, but I encouraged him to use the necessary ground of being. That's basically the thing that he means when he says God, and like we've talked like many times now about how that's not really, it's not God. It's not even a good
Yeah.
label at that stage.
No, I mean, it doesn't carry what, to me, God is the anthropomorphization of
No
statements that
No
are more
doubt.
functional.
No doubt. I would
And we
definitely
did that
agree with
to
that.
understand.
That's a very apt analysis.
It's just we did that because that was the narrativistic inclination of our species to be able to hold a story instead of a equation.
Bang on again. I definitely agree.
But like now that we're trying to update what it is that we were trying to reference, like you said, like I completely agree with your analysis about the way early people that struggled with trying to find our way in terms of sense making, like they just had to come up with a fiction that worked for their group, and the groups that were the most adaptive and successful had a kind of coherability because they were somewhat morally bound by the code of conduct that they were passing on from tent fire to tent fire, or not tent fire.
For sure, and I think like the fact that like in Christianity's fundamental code of honor is that like God is truth is sort of like a tacit encouragement to be truthful,
Right.
and to emphasize truth even when it might be your undoing. And I think that that's something that Christianity has like brought out of our civilization very effectively, much to its undoing, because now
Yeah.
we know that Christianity is not a good explanation.
Well, it is barely a good metaphor because of how confusing it's been. But,
of course, but it's a good metaphor if you think of the fact that it's what caused us to bring about the good explanation.
for sure, like that is
Because in terms of
completely
like what a
uncontestable.
metaphor is for, right? Like, let's say we'll call it a parable. It's a good parable, you know,
It's a
even
good
if it's
parable
not.
for sure.
Yeah, even if it's not a very clear parable, the thing that it affected historically is fantastic, and it was a direct consequence of the emphasis placed on truth.
Well, that, and not coincidentally, like Brett Weinstein and Richard Dawkins had a debate recently, which I haven't gotten to listen to. But the cool thing is that Brett is an evolutionary biologist who was influenced heavily by all of Dawkins' early work, and he's like, the thing that you set forth with memes and how they need basically like a biological host in order to pass from body to body. He's like, that right there is essentially like a rebranding of what it is that religion has done this whole time.
For sure. And like realistically, it's another name for what we might call the psychological archetype of our species.
Yes, and it's the thing that predisposes us to better adaptability in terms of group survivability.
Absolutely.
So it conferred all of this kind of ability for early, kind of not primitive, but like less scientifically aware versions of our species to hold a type of truth, or a thing that gestured towards it at least.
Without like, so putting the conversation on pause for a moment.
Yeah.
How would you guys distinguish between where to place an overview and where to place a front matter in a book?
A what? A front matter?
Yeah, a post.
What does that mean?
It's an introduction to an idea.
A front matter?
Yeah, whereas an overview is like a very brief synopsis of the entirety of like all.
An overview is on the like first page, like not the book. Like when you open it, you know how there's like a blank page usually.
No, that's a front matter.
No, because like you said, like a front matter is like an introduction. A preface or an introduction can be many pages.
So, okay, my understanding of a front matter is that a front matter introduces the thing to the subject, whereas the overview talks about everything, like very briefly to the subject. But the way that you introduce them is like long.
So what I'm talking about, like, is not a front matter. Like, because if a front matter is just something that introduces it, an introduction and a preface both count as like what you call a front matter. And like, you can put a synopsis like right inside on the first page, and I've seen books do it before. It is a synopsis. It's a summary of the book's content, basically.
And were you asking about like what order to put it in?
I was just asking the location to place an overview opposed to front matter.
Well, if I understand front matter properly, front matter would be at the start of a part, section, or chapter, and an overview would be something that you would put at the start of the entire like book or paper.
Ah, I think I get what you're saying now. Is an overview a good thing for like the back of the book?
I actually just looked it up. Apparently,
No,
there's
that's a blurb.
I looked it up. Apparently, there's two types of front matter. So you have a primary front matter, which introduces the book, and then you have like a section front. The front matter section, which like introduces the like section. Although, I guess you could say that like an overview could be contained within a front matter.
Yeah, definitely. So what were we talking about? I've forgotten.
We were basically arguing for the existence of ghosts.
Ghosts do exist, bro. Duh. Don't you even know anything?
You were a ghost before you were you.
No, I do. That's why I'm arguing for the existence of ghosts. See?
Ah, okay. Genius. We got a real Einstein over here.
No, because Einstein never argued for the existence of ghosts. That's why Einstein was wrong.
That's
You're
what
right.
you
That is
think.
what I think.
Yeah, but you don't know. You didn't know Einstein.
I only like looked at some of his stuff. That's true.
Yeah, but how would you know if he ever argued about ghosts? He might have.
Because a ghost told me. Duh.
Well, I can't argue with that.
I know. You should be like direct more often.
I seriously do not remember though what we were talking about.
Oh, I think we were just going down the hypothetical tubes of argument that you could do a parody. I'm sorry, of Dawkins, Darth Dawkins.
That's right, but I feel like we stopped talking about that and started talking about parables.
Yeah, we got a little more sincere.
Oh, Christianity's emphasis on truth. I stopped being Dawkins without realizing it.
Yeah, and I pretty much like slid right into it because I was like, wait, hold on. This isn't sounding unreasonable the way that you're saying it too.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit because I automatically update most people's interpretation of what they mean when they say the word God to something that they don't know about.
Yeah, I get you.
Pretty sure genome is like shit posting, but I'm kind of playing along.
Do you mean gnome?
Genome. No, because you say the G. Just like gymnastic. You say the G.
What if I say
Hold on a second, guys.
What about GIF?
It's
actually correct anyway.
Yeah, I think that is. But I didn't like that.
That's what the author says it should be called.
I always liked GIF.
Or the creator or whatever.
Yeah, I think I said GIF for years until not too long ago.
How about them memes though, right?
Yeah, man. Dude, there was one that you posted that I was actually going to ask. It was a SpongeBob one. It went through Might Is Right.
Oh, yeah, with Thrasy Marcus or whatever it is.
Yeah, and what looked like Socrates, or?
Yeah, it would have been Socrates.
I didn't understand it. And I was like, wait, I gotta ask Matt about this one. I can't tell if it's funny or true.
Like I think it's just, I mean, that is what he thought. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I think it's just supposed to be about how ridiculous it is. Do you know what I mean? Because he's like reading it off the identification,
Mhm.
and it's like it's a position that you sort of like feel you is just the way things are. It's like it's something that's assigned to you. You know what I mean? And like what your identification card would show you is like,
Yeah.
you know, what's like
Your
just the way
address,
you are. Like yeah,
your
yeah,
height.
yeah, like exactly, yeah. And so it's like he treats might is right as in like that's just how it is.
That's
And
his
Socrates
eye
is
color.
like, but is that just how it is, bro?
Yeah. And then it was like he responded with justice is just like another form of, I forget the last line of it, but I was like,
Yeah, it says justice is nothing other than the advantage of the strong. And that
was
is actually what he says in the dialogue with Socrates that I've read.
interesting. And see, that part was like how that rang to me. I was like, so those that perceive justice or injustice in the world and can wield it appropriately or accurately or without error have an advantage that is comparable to power or something like that.
No, it's not supposed to indicate that. He's making fun of the view, right? So the last line is like Socrates mimicking him, right? It's like he's like, this is a ridiculous thing that you think, and he's like repeating it because it sounds ridiculous. Like if you say, right, and because so like, but wouldn't this promote injustice as a virtue? And because that would make man unhappy, isn't justice more than might makes right? Right? And then the response is like, no, even though obviously that, you know, if we say that injustice is a virtue, and that it follows necessarily that in like a virtue, one of the virtues would make man unhappy, right? Because injustice makes people unhappy,
Okay.
right? And so then he says, because that being the case, injustice being a virtue would make man unhappy, it has to be the case that justice is more than might makes right. And then
I agree, right?
Thrasymachus just then Thrasymachus just repeats his original position, right? He just says like justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger, which is might makes right. There's nothing else to it,
So he just
right?
doubled down.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. So what was funny to me though is that like it communicated something nuanced to me, and I don't know if that's because I have a skewed.
Oh no, man! Have you ever read the like Last Days of Socrates?
No.
Oh my god, dude!
I know you've told me to, and I
It's
always
so
neglect to.
amazing. Like it's like that thing that you're looking at, like the first what would you say? The first section of the Last Days of Socrates is him questioning a religious guy about what exactly virtue is. Right?
Okay.
Because the religious guy in the story is like at court, and Socrates is at court because he's being tried for like corrupting the youth and answering to false gods, something like that.
Okay.
And then this other guy, Euthyphrates or something, is there, and he's there to prosecute his dad for killing a servant, right? Which actually, in their time, that was normal and not an immoral thing to do. And then this guy is like, well, like I understand religion very well, and I'm telling you that killing anybody is wrong. Even if the person like holding your relatives accountable for killing a slave, even though he's your father, right? That would be something that would be considered like really out of unconventional, like you shouldn't be doing that, frowned upon sort of thing, because it's like he's your father, you know what I mean? Like you're not taking him to court. That's not a good idea. That's the sort of idea.
Gotcha.
And so like Socrates is just sort of like, well, you must be very confident in your knowledge if you're willing to like risk the wrath of the gods for sending your father to prison, right? For killing a servant who is like below his status, like automatically. Like he basically says like for you to be willing to do such a thing, you must be very, very confident in your understanding of religious matters. And like the other guy says that he is, and he like boasts about his knowledge. And Socrates is like, all right then, could you teach me the difference between virtue and not virtue? And the other guy sort of tries, and Socrates listens, and then constructs an analogy in his head, and then asks questions, getting the other person to agree every step of the way, and arrives at the conclusion that their original thing was wrong.
Huh. That
And
sounds
it's
so
like
good.
it's very impressive. It's like one of the first like direct pieces of categorical reasoning that we had. It's the thing that Plato like perfected when he started using the dialectic, right? Like Socratic questioning was just about questioning the assumptions, and he did that in a categorical way, but like the dialectic was the assignment of categories to everything that there is.
Nice. Dude, I love hearing that. That's like because isn't it true that Socrates didn't write anything?
That's correct. Plato wrote down his thoughts.
Yeah, and I've always thought that was the way to do it.
Oh my god, this is awesome. Kyrgyzstan in a nutshell, Niran, just released a new video, which, if you don't know, they're like a really like excellent YouTube channel that's like well researched. Kyrgyzstan in a nutshell.
Oh, yes, that guy. Gotcha. What's the title?
They have like very high quality work. The video they just released is titled "End of Space dash," and well, technically it's an M dash, but end of space M dash, creating a prison for humanity. So I imagine that, like, I haven't watched the video, but I imagine the video is going to be about how the end of space is a prison for humanity. I'm sorry, N dash. This isn't an M dash.
I remember scrolling through that actually now.
I mean, it was released just 17 hours ago, but
yeah, that was it. It was like 14 hours ago when I saw it.
I see. Fair enough.
It was, yeah, right before I got on here, actually. Something like that.
Part of me wants to record some Zelda, although, like, it's weird because I don't feel like going to bed, but I also feel kind of tired.
I feel like I need to go to bed, but I'm not tired.
You're not allowed.
Is it more like you, like, intellectually think you should go to bed, but, like, you don't like feel like you want to go to bed?
Something like that. Like I prefer the stimulation of the mind as opposed to trying to toss and turn to get rest.
Yeah.
But I know I'll be tired tomorrow. So I'm like trying to save. That's kind of like a slightly Epicurean preference where I don't want to borrow from tomorrow's happiness too much.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm definitely still interested in chatting.
For sure.
Like I wanted to actually say, I read through your outline, and I like a lot of it, man. I would love to actually probably go through it line by line. Matt said you guys recently did some updates on it too.
Yep. But like we need to do more work when like either like one of us isn't a zombie or distracted or like trying to battle space aliens or whatever.
Right.
The thing is like it's still quite like underdeveloped, but I do think like I'm fairly confident in a lot of the like initial framework.
Yeah. It's got the makings of, I described it metaphorically as a bit like a ladder or like an olive branch extending out to people that don't realize they're kind of in a sea of mysticism, and kind of quantifying what some of that mystery might be as the arcane. Like, yeah, I get where you're aiming to help people like step out of the quicksand, so to speak.
Yeah, well, like, so do you know much about Thales?
I don't think I know anything about that guy.
Thales of Miletus?
So Thales of Miletus.
Whatever, buddy.
Fucking fix your English, God. You're so terrible at English. Jeez.
I know, right?
Okay. So Thales of Miletus, which Miletus is located in Turkey of the.
What did you call me? Did you call me a turkey?
I said Thales of Miletus.
Don't you ever call me a turkey?
No.
You little turkey.
I'm too tired to like differentiate between humor and not. So
I'm sorry.
dude. It's okay. You can go to hell.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. but anyhow, the point is he's like what's generally recognized as like the first Western philosopher.
Okay.
And
I
essentially,
mean, isn't he recognized as the first natural philosopher ever?
Oh, is this the guy that?
It's less debatable when you take into account like Eastern philosophy, but
Oh.
yeah, like,
That's a fair call.
Yeah. Just like we want to throw that like well
It's a
out.
very Western thing that I said, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you fucking
dare you.
fucking Eurocentrist. Fuck you.
I know, right?
So what I was gonna say is like you should be a Sinocentrist or you're gonna like go to hell. No.
That's a fair call.
What I was gonna say is like he had this idea of the arcane. And his like view of what the arcane was the his idea was, so the arcane is the fundamental substance of everything, and then so the arcane is fundamental substance of everything, comma, the arcane is water. And so essentially because of that, he introduced like this really important idea, and he didn't introduce much that's like survived because like a lot of old writings like are gone because of things like the burning of Alexandria, etc.
Right.
But the point is like what does survive is like a result of what other people have like talked about him.
Okay.
And in any case, like I'm using arcane in the same sense he did because like it carries like historic weight, and it also like it's like I really like the word in general because I think it carries like a lot of weight, not just for the like not just because of the historic context, but also just because of how it sounds. So
Yeah, dude, I'm with you on that, and I think it's always. Well, let me back up a bit. I like and prefer to seek to understand the derivation of a word as influential to the definition of it.
I need to I really need to just comb through the first chapter and polish that significantly, and the fact that I haven't is just it's sort of it's kind of a combination of like in sync being quite busy, and then like myself like being busy when he's not. Yeah, but it's sort of like like I'm unreliable, like when
we all share
like
that,
when you are reliable.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, we do with it. Like sometimes I'll be ready and he's not, vice versa.
Yeah, and it sucks too because like sometimes I'll be like really prepared, and then like we'll be in the middle of it and I'll be like, dude, I'm like fucking tired as shit. And it's like I want to continue, but it's like I legitimately do, but it's like I know if I do, I'll just produce garbage.
Yeah,
I mean, it's why I distinctly avoided like saying much in this conversation here, because I'm not convinced in my ability to like communicate like cogent ideas, because I'm fucking shit right now.
Did you sound better today than you did yesterday?
Do I?
Nah, he just always sounds really stoned, man.
You do always sound stoned.
No, I don't think that I don't think that
You
like I do
definitely
sound
sound
better.
stoned.
No, better.
Oh.
I thought I
Nah,
sounded
he
much better
probably
yesterday.
doesn't.
I like the stony sound, but it makes me feel like I need to pick a mad rhythm or something.
Okay, what's funny? Like maybe I should get actually stoned and then start talking.
It's not a bad idea, man.
What I was going to say is that like Nah, the reason why I think I'm why I think I sound worse today, maybe not in this exact instance, but like overall, is just because like I haven't had like a strong sense of mental clarity. Like I did earlier, but like far less like in the duration of this conversation. That's why I was like, hey, let's put this idea off, or let's put that idea off, because it's like why do I want to talk about something if I'm not convinced like I can talk about it right at that moment? You know?
I mean, realistically, though, Eddie and I can do some like translation on what you're trying to say and what you have said.
Yeah,
it would help us all.
I don't. Yeah, but it's like I'm communicating like I think precise particulars that like can't like it's like if I'm not like doing it well, then it's like even if you try to fill in the gaps, I don't think I don't think like you can do a very good job just based off the nature of like what we're talking about.
I don't know. I do a pretty great job filling in the gaps, generally speaking, especially with this specific topic.
Oh, sure, maybe better than like a lot of people, but just like the nature of this makes it much harder, so I'd rather not like take that chance.
For me
No, I get
personally,
you.
like I've listened to people for a long time trying to find those that had, in essence, what is meant by data logic. And I use this analogy of the broken clock. Like I find that every human has the capacity to kind of be data logical at least twice a day by virtue of their not knowing that they can be right in that capacity. Like it'll be a subconscious way that they just align with being correct. But problems ensue, generally speaking, when you bring awareness to that process, and that perceptual apparatus, if you will, is not prepared to make the necessary changes in order to support the way that it is that it can come to know something like what data logic is pointing at. So what Matt gave to me in terms of the way that he had formalized all of the logic of it, I rejected logic like without knowing it at the early stages of my ontological development. And when I first encountered Matt, it was online, and it was as if he was having 6 to 10 conversations with 6 to 10 different people, trying to course correct their understandings of his words. Was like my immediate perception of what was going on in that moment. And I was like, how the fuck is this kid typing this fast? And it was one of those moments where like I was one of the 10 people that he started to talk to. And it's like, if you caught someone that was just like catching balls and throwing them back at people, and then a guy came and stood next to him, like I was the guy that came and stood next to him shoulder to shoulder. And then he just started going, wait, what are you doing over here? How did you get here, essentially? And it was like a moment where we both just kind of saw each other, and it was just all through texting. But it was like, I mean, metaphorically, that I'm characterizing it that way so that I convey the kind of emotional feeling of it.
Yeah,
because I didn't understand what he was actually getting at that point. The content of his message was completely missed.
Yeah, for me, so of course I did recently meet Matthew, but like the thing is so Matthew, in like a lot of the ways he thinks, is quite similar to my other friend Tim. Like extremely similar, and because I'm like extremely similar to Tim in a lot of ways, it was easy to like relate to Matt, because like I was quite well practiced already. Because like it's just an expression of like talking to myself.
Totally.
And so basically I just like did that, even though like myself had like a different process. Like I totally understand, like, hey, I want you to say this because like that is like my distinction between these two, and I want you to like talk to me in a way that like I can use to further what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that it can be difficult for people as well, but I also understand that, like, you know, the importance of a lot of this distinction, which a lot of undeveloped people might readily dismiss.
Yeah, especially if like you don't realize that you're willing to give up on things that are kind of fundamental, or just not care. Like one of the things that came up with the free will debate is that the fact that you can disregard things out of petulance is generally taken to be an example or evidence of.
I don't know if it generally is, but he was definitely putting it forward as one.
Yes, exactly. Like, well, I mean, generally in the way that proponents of free will relate to that. Thank you. Yes, they act as though the fact that they can be in error or petulant or some other form of obstinance is an example of freedom. And I mean, what was one of the ways we characterized it in the beginning with that, Matt? Like,
yeah, I mean, like, I think what they might be saying is it's one of the most free types of, like, behavior you'll exhibit, because it's like you're not free, but that not freedom is pointed at being free of all the things you can think of. You know what I mean?
say that again.
So, like, you're not free because, like, you're still being bound by the deterministic mechanics. But the thing that your deterministic mechanics are aiming at in the moment is being free from all of the systems you can think of. Being a rebel, you know what I mean? Like, doing what you want because you want to do it. And when you do something because you know you shouldn't do it, that is your, like, the mechanics of your system saying, okay, like, my goal... The goal of these mechanics is to produce a result that contradicts as many systems as I can think of.
And it achieves it.
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, for sure. It seems like it. It's definitely a performative contradiction.
Yes, and it convinces its own, like, sense of sense-making. In some
That's
weird...
fair, yeah.
It's like some kind of weird mental gymnastics that are happening there that I don't...
Man, I tell you what, that fucking the equivalence we drew between, like, the getting up a, like, sheer face of that metaphorical mountain and, like, mental gymnastics, that was a great one. That is compelling, a compelling similarity to point out.
I thought it was too. And the other thing that I like about that analogy is, like, some people kind of show up over prepared to scale a mountain. They like a person that's going on a camping expedition versus someone who knows and is seasoned with one. Like, that noob sometimes shows up with just a backpack full of shit that they don't realize that they're going to have to carry up.
For sure. Except, like, in this situation, like, everybody's climbing the mountain and almost none of them are experts.
None of them are experts, and they all came over prepared because they've courted complexity in some way.
For sure.
And they think that the more stuff that they bring, the more prepared they'll be.
That's such a good analogy, man.
And it's like the simpler the better, the less you have, the kind of load is light, so you can be nimble.
It's because like the accumulation of stuff doesn't necessitate higher utility.
Of course, but I think, like, when we're thinking about like, explanations of the world, because it seems so complicated to us, a lot of people jump to the conclusion that, like, in explanation it there's a justification for having an explanation that's very complicated.
Yes.
And it's that the world is very complicated. And I don't actually think that does justify it, but it's definitely true that the world is very complicated.
Yeah, especially at the social layer. Just if you start from something like that's already, like, kind of politically stratified in a way, as the present world climate of politics is, it automatically just looks like chaos on display, the circus, the spectacle. And when you try and sort that portion of it out first, I don't think you can ever find the thing that isn't moving so that you can start to measure it, so to speak.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's one of the main reasons that, like, the proper analysis of the world should start with the individual.
It has to. Like, there's really no way around it. And some synthesis of individual in awareness of its collective kind of poles or impulses.
Yeah,
Areas.
definitely.
I mean, I think that at least so far as like others are concerned, ethics is the system that you navigate how best to actualize like what your values are insofar as like moving through the space that you're in with the other agents.
Yeah, with other agents.
Thank you for listening. Like, share, subscribe, and join us in the Nameless Debates Discord. We hope to see you there.